人間そのものに近い架空の人間なんですけどドキュメンタリーを撮ってるかのように作るっていうのが僕の漫画だと思うので、実際にその僕が考えるいい漫画だと思います。
Takehiko Inoue created 3 of the most respected manga in the history of the medium: Slam Dunk, Vagabond, and Real. That's almost 40 years of work across all 3, and he walked away from every single one. Not because editors canceled them or because he ran out of ideas. He chose to leave every time. By the end of this video, you'll understand why 185 million copies in sales wasn't enough to get a single proper ending. Inoue grew up in Kagoshima Prefecture obsessed with 2 things: basketball and drawing. He spent years assisting Tsukasa Hojo, the creator of City Hunter, before making his professional debut in the late 80s. The moment that changed everything arrived in 1990 when Slam Dunk launched in Weekly Shonen Jump. The series became one of the best-selling manga of all time, sparking a basketball boom across Japan so massive that the Japan Basketball Association later gave Inoue a formal commendation for it. By the mid-90s, he was one of the most important names in the industry. Most channels will tell you this is where the weekly grind burned him out. That's not wrong, but it misses the part that actually matters. Inoue broke out from the system, but the system figured out it didn't need him back. In 1996, at the absolute peak of Slam Dunk's popularity, Inoue ended it himself. He wrapped the series during the national championship arc, right after the game between Shohoku and Sano, the best match the manga ever produced. The team wins, but loses the following game. Then the manga cuts to a brief flash forward. Akagi graduates, Ryota takes over as captain, Sakuragi starts physical therapy for a severe back injury. 6 years of story, and the ending gives the characters a handful of pages to close their arcs. He left at the absolute peak, and the industry would spend the next 3 decades proving it didn't need him to stay.
それでも決してこう悪いだけではなくて、それによって良かった部分っていっぱいあると思うし、スラムダンクって多分そういう時期の作品だっていうふうに僕は思ってるんですけど。
In December of 2004, 8 years after the manga ended, Inoue rented a shuttered high school in Kanagawa and drew farewell messages for each character in chalk across 23 blackboards. Just him, alone, over 2 days. Over 5,000 fans showed up across 3 days to see what happened 10 days after the final chapter. The event was meant to thank readers for buying 100 million copies. It was beautiful. It was also the goodbye the manga itself never got. But that first exit taught the industry something. Slam Dunk didn't need new chapters to keep making money. Shueisha repackaged the same story 5 separate times over the next 2 decades. A complete edition, a restructured new edition in 2018, a single-volume Jump imitation book, and the first ever digital release across all 20 volumes in June of 2025, nearly 30 years after serialization ended. Viz Media announced a North American deluxe edition in 2026. The series kept generating revenue without a single new page of story. And then there was the film. In 2022, Inoue wrote and directed the first Slam Dunk. It made over $279 million at the global box office. The system didn't just let him walk away from Slam Dunk. It rewarded him for returning to it instead of finishing what came after. Vagabond hadn't seen a new chapter since 2015. Real was barely publishing. Proven IP is a guaranteed revenue, and finishing an unfinished story is a risk no publisher needs to take when the existing work keeps selling on its own. If you watched our video on Yoshihiro Togashi, you already know what the Weekly Shonen Jump system costs a person. Togashi gave it his body and spent decades paying the price. But Inoue's version of that story is almost stranger because he got out clean, moved to a magazine that promised him total creative freedom, yet still couldn't finish what he started.
そんな部屋の片隅で一人目を冷やす男がいた。
2 years after leaving Shonen Jump, Inoue launched Vagabond in Kodansha's morning magazine, a seinen title adapting the legend of Miyamoto Musashi. Everything about the move was built to give him what Shonen Jump never could. No survey rankings, no weekly deadlines, no cancellation acts hovering over every chapter. Total creative freedom for the first time in his career. And what he produced under those conditions was staggering. Vagabond's art evolved across its run from excellent to something the medium had rarely seen. Inoue shifted from pen and ink to brush techniques, and his later chapters read more like painted fine art than sequential panels. The storytelling slowed to match, becoming more contemplative, less concerned with what Musashi was doing, and more with what he was feeling. There's an entire farming arc in the later volumes where the greatest swordsman in Japanese fiction puts down his sword and learns to grow rice. And the pages are so quiet and so beautiful that they feel closer to gallery work than anything meant to be serialized in a magazine. By the time it hit 37 volumes and over 82 million copies, critics were calling it one of the greatest manga ever drawn, and then the hiatuses started stacking. Short breaks stretched into long ones. In 2010, Inoue posted on his website that the series wouldn't return until he regained what he called enthusiasm for it. It came back briefly after that, then went dark again. The last chapter was published in May of 2015, over 11 years ago, and nothing has followed. Just silence, with Musashi's story frozen mid-arc, the final duel against Sasaki Kojiro never drawn. The ending of one of the most celebrated manga ever created permanently out of reach. You could look at Vagabond and blame the system for not pushing him hard enough. Nobody forced him to come back, so he didn't. But that explanation falls apart the moment you look at Real.
いいストーリーを作るのは登場人物が生きていればその人物たちが、ストーリーを作っていきますかって。
Inoue launched the series in 1999 in Shueisha's Weekly Young Jump, just a year after starting Vagabond. The premise was wheelchair basketball, but not as a gimmick. It was a serious exploration of disability, resilience, and what it feels like to lose your body's ability to do the thing you built your entire identity around. Characters dealing with spinal cord injuries and the slow work of rebuilding a sense of self. This was the opposite of a commercial play. No action set pieces to sell as merchandise, no legacy IP to repackage into premium hardcovers, just a deeply personal story about people the manga industry rarely centers. This is where every external explanation for the pattern falls apart. There was no Shonen Jump survey system pressuring him. Real ran in a seinen magazine with none of the weekly ranking anxiety. There was no grueling weekly schedule because the series was published sporadically from the beginning on Inoue's own terms. There was no publisher extracting value from an IP too big to let die because Real was never that kind of property. He had creative freedom, he had schedule control, he had zero commercial pressure. The series went on a 5-year hiatus from 2014 to 2019, and when it came back at roughly one chapter every 3 months. 17 volumes across 27 years. For comparison, Slam Dunk produced 31 in 6. That's not a scheduling choice, that's abandonment. Volume 16 of Real had a first print run of 250,000 copies, Shueisha's 15th highest first print volume for 2024-2025. The audience is still there, the demand hasn't moved, and Shueisha doesn't need him to speed up because those 250,000 copies will sell regardless of when the next one arrives. And I need you to sit with what that means for all 3 stories. Vagabond was redefining manga as a visual art form when it stopped mid-sentence. Real was telling a story almost nobody else in the medium had the courage to attempt, and it's crawling toward a finish line it may never reach. Slam Dunk denied its audience a proper farewell to characters they'd invested years in. The fan community has split into 2 camps. One side says respect his process, the other says if you start a story, you owe it an ending. But both sides miss the mechanics. The frozen IP is the product. The hiatus isn't a problem the publishers need to solve, it's a condition they've learned to monetize.
しかし一向に手が進まない。
The mechanics explain why the industry lets him stay gone. They don't explain why he leaves. Look at all three exits together. He didn't leave Slam Dunk when it was struggling. He left during the best arc the series ever produced. Vagabond wasn't declining in quality when it stopped. The art was ascending into territory no serialized manga had ever occupied. And Real didn't lose its audience. 250,000 copies say otherwise. Every exit happened at or near a creative peak. Not a single one happened at a low. Inoue has talked about this, and his own words tell you more than any outside theory could. In an interview during Vagabond's first major hiatus, he said the problem was that he started thinking too much about the ending. Not that he was exhausted, not that his body was failing. He started thinking about how to land the story, and that thinking killed his ability to keep drawing it. He's also said he's never been especially good at making stories, that what drove him on Slam Dunk was putting a good basketball game into picture form and drawing some sweet plays. He's an artist before he's a storyteller, and endings are a storytelling problem, not an art problem. That word he used in 2010, enthusiasm, makes sense in that context. He didn't lose the desire to draw. He lost the ability to see a path to the ending that matched the standard of everything that came before. He could push a series to heights nobody else in the medium had reached. But finishing means the work has to come down from the peak, and for Inoue, that descent was the one thing he could never write. Each time Inoue walked away, the industry made it easier to stay gone. Kodansha never declared Vagabond cancelled. Inoue retains full rights, which means no one else can touch the story, and the publisher has no contractual mechanism to force completion. But they don't need one. The existing work generates revenue without a single new page. In January of 2025, the industry gave its clearest answer to the question of whether Vagabond would ever continue. Viz launched the Vagabond Definitive Edition, premium hardcovers at $55 a volume, printed on art paper, 12 volumes planned to repackage the same 37. This isn't a placeholder waiting for the story to resume. It's a product line built on the permanent assumption that it never will. The publisher doesn't need volume 38 because they can sell the existing 37 at a higher margin every few years. A bad ending would damage the IP's long-term value more than an indefinite hiatus ever could. The economics actively discourage completion. During the film's promotional tour in 2022, Inoue told an interviewer he can't wait to start drawing Vagabond again. He's been saying versions of that since 2009. The industry's answer arrived 3 years after that interview, not as a new chapter, as 12 luxury hardcovers that assume he never will. Takehiko Inoue isn't lazy, and the system isn't broken. The system works exactly the way it was designed to. It extracts value from the work that exists and never requires the work that doesn't. Slam Dunk, Vagabond, Real, almost 4 decades. 185 million copies across one series alone, 82 million across another. He could leave, he just couldn't land. And the industry made sure he never had to.